record. That is so that for those who were not able to join us live during the conversation, they will be able to watch it at their convenience. So we are going to be recording. So thank you so much for that. Also, as we go through the presentations with our speakers today, we will ask everyone to stay muted during the presentations. And for questions, we will ask those during the Q&A, which we will have at the end of the Lunch and Learn. Of course, if you have questions that kind of come up during the conversations, you can always pop those into the chat so you don't have to worry about forgetting them. And we will go through the chat during the Q&A and make sure we answer as many of those as we can while we have time. So again, a special thank you to our Lunch and Learn sponsor, GBX Group. And the generous support of our sponsors allows us to continue providing educational programs and further our work to support Florida's history and heritage. So with that kind of housekeeping stuff said, I would like to take a moment to have you introduced to our speakers for today. I'll just share who they are, and then maybe they could give a little more content about their lives. So we have Rob Naylor from Preservation Action, Jack Newton from the GBX Group, me, and Mark Zubaly from the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. So Rob, if you wouldn't mind, could you just share a little bit about yourself for our team here?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Rob Naylor. I'm the Associate Director of Preservation Action. We're a national grassroots lobbying organization for historic preservation. I've been with the organization for about 10 years now or so. I'm actually based in Cincinnati at this point, but got involved with Preservation Action when I was living in DC. Um, I say my background is not so much a traditional preservation background, but more on the policy side. I know I kind of got my introduction to the preservation world when I attended Kent State University in Northeast Ohio and kind of got exposed to some of the efforts to save kind of the May 4th, 1970 shooting sites and things like that. And that was kind of my first exposure to preservation. But like I said, I've been really enjoying the policy side and of course doing this work on behalf of an issue like preservation. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jack, would you like to go next?
Sure. Jack Newton. I'm a senior manager of community development for GBX Group. Like Rob, I'm based in Ohio, up in Cleveland. But we are a preservation-minded development company slash investment fund. We work all over the country. And I get involved with preservation action and other advocacy efforts, both at the local, state, and federal level. And we have a lot of love for Florida. We actually just acquired a beautiful hospitality building in Key West, Florida, and protected it with a historic preservation easement, which is a primary tool that we use and one that we heavily advocate for. So looking forward to talking with you in just a few slides.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. And I've already introduced myself, so we'll skip me. And then Mark, you could maybe just tell us a little bit about you and your area of expertise.
Um, I'm a board member of the trust, and I guess really my expertise would be advocacy. I do political work in real life and volunteer as a member of the trust because of my love for historic preservation. And for the past 5 or 6 years since I've been on the board, have kind of led the trust's efforts in advocacy to the state legislature and local governments.
Awesome. Great. Well, with all of that said, you guys know who we're going to be hearing from today. We have a great group and we have a lot to cover. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our national advocacy overview. So Rob, if you are ready, we will get going.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, my name's like I said, Rob Naylor. I'm the Associate Director of Preservation Action. We are a national grassroots lobbying organization for historic preservation. So I'm going to spend some time kind of going over a little bit of background of who we are, kind of the work that we do, and then some of the specific issues that we're advocating on, as well as how it is you can be involved and be a grassroots advocate for historic preservation yourself at the national level. Um, So Preservation Action was formed in 1974 as the only national grassroots lobbying organization dedicated exclusively to preservation. We were formed after the National Historic Preservation Act passed in 1966, which helped establish the National Register of Historic Places. We were formed by a group of citizen advocates who thought we needed a dedicated voice to advocate for preservation. Our first president was Nellie Longsworth. She was really instrumental in passing key preservation laws, including like the historic tax credit, which was established in 1976. Next slide. So some of our key activities, of course, are going to be monitoring legislation, working to influence policy, and where we really think our lane is helping to try to bring in that grassroots voice to the conversation. Examples of some of the things we do every year, including writing testimony on appropriations bills to other things that are issues as they come up. I know I have a example here. This is actually from 2019, so from the previous Trump administration that proposed harmful changes to the National Register. So we submitted responses and really worked to try to make what can be sometimes complex and weird language to make these easy to understand and make it easy for everyone to be able to take action on their own. So that's really kind of the lane where we see ourselves. Next slide. And then, I'll just quickly mention one of our kind of hallmarks is our weekly legislative update. We're doing this for the last several years. It provides a good overview of what's happening in Washington, the impact and how that impacts preservation and how you can take action. So I can share a link about signing up for that towards the end as well. But encourage everyone, it's open, it's free, so everyone can join that. Another thing we do is our congressional candidate survey. We survey congressional candidates. So every U.S. House and Senate candidate running every 2 years. So every election cycle, we gauge their support for preservation, and we really try to both educate the candidates on preservation before they're even in office necessarily, as well as educate voters and assist advocacy, and it helps assist our advocacy efforts moving forward. So we just did this last cycle ahead of the current election. Next slide. Another one of our key events is our congressional briefing in May. We host this in conjunction with Historic Preservation Month. Really good opportunity to educate congressional staff, which, as we know, can turn over very frequently on the kind of federal historic preservation program broadly, and then some of our key issues that we're working on. We co-host this along with the Historic Preservation Caucus, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. Next slide. And then that kind of brings me to our biggest event and really our flagship event as an organization is we host the National Historic Preservation Advocacy Week. We host this alongside our National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers. And it's really the historic preservations industry annual lobby day. So we have people fly in to Washington, D.C. from across the country to meet with our members of Congress on historic preservation issues. We really work to try to provide the materials and the training. We have a whole day dedicated ahead of the actual lobby day to really get you familiar with the issues. We always have a great team from Florida who comes. So Melissa comes every year. And like I said, there's really no quite the being able to do the direct advocacy directly is really important. This year, especially, we've seen great engagement actually sold out the event. So normally I'd be pitching this event a little bit harder, but we're actually sold out for this year. But it's just coming up in just a couple of weeks here, and I definitely encourage everyone to attend if you're interested and able to. It's really a great opportunity. Next slide. So yeah, next I'll kind of go over some of our key issues that we'll be working on as part of Advocacy Week and throughout the year. So of course, one of them is the federal historic tax credit. So this has been an ongoing issue for the last several years. So the historic tax credit, as everyone knows, but just to kind of provide a brief background, provides a 20% tax credit for the rehabilitation of historic income-producing properties. We continue to advocate for much-needed changes to help improve and modernize the credit. It hasn't been updated since the 1980s. And especially in the last few years, we've really seen a decline in the value of the credit due to several changes, one from the Tax Reform Act in 2017, as well as others having the credit taken from 5 years to 1 year. So this is really kind of our advocacy around this has really turned from something that I think at time it might have been just something that would have been nice to have to something that's really needed at this point to be able to continue these projects going. So we're working with our champions in Congress to reintroduce the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act. If you've been following this, it's similar to what past years, but there are going to be a few new changes. Um, it would, increase the credit from 20% to 30% for smaller projects, as well as includes kind of several changes that are aimed at encouraging more building reuse, more redevelopment, and especially in small and mid-sized cities, and make it easier to use and increase the number of projects that are eligible. So especially with this year, I think as you may have seen, one of the top priorities of Congress is passing a significant tax reform bill. So I think this actually prevents one of the biggest opportunities we've had in a long time to really be able to get some of these much needed changes to the tax credit across the finish line. Um, we think that we're in a pretty good place. We think we've really kind of helped grow that support for the program and for these changes over the last several Congresses. But that doesn't mean that we're not always paying attention to potential threats to the program, and we'll definitely be paying close attention to that. We expect the bill to be introduced soon, hopefully before Advocacy Week. That's our goal, and I can definitely share more information as that becomes available. And we really encourage everyone to take action on that. I can also share a link here from our partners at the Trust about sending a letter, easy to use, in support of including these changes as part of tax reform. So, next slide. So yeah, moving on. Next, talk a little bit about the Historic Preservation Fund. So for those who's not familiar, this is the primary source of funding for introducing the Federal Historic Preservation Program. So it's going to fund state and tribal historic preservation officers, as well as several grant programs that have been established more in recent years, but includes the Save America's Treasures Grant Program, the African American Civil Rights Grant Program, Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Grants, um, underrepresented communities grants, or several grant programs that are part of that. Now, currently it's funded at 188.66 million. We've actually seen record increases for this program over the last several years. Currently, we're advocating along with our partners for 225 million for the program. I think it's important to kind of keep in mind that the advocating for the HPF is an annual activity. This is a line item in the National Park Service budget every year. So it really requires that kind of continuous advocacy to really be able to get these changes for it. And we've seen some successes with that. That said, I think we are kind of looking at the current political environment and we're definitely concerned that there could be some challenges to the funding for this program. We definitely expect President Trump's budget to potentially not be the most ideal, but I think it's important to keep in mind that the Congress controls the purse strings. So we're still working with our champions. We have great bipartisan support to be able to get that through. Next slide. So there's kind of two components to our advocacy around the Historic Preservation Fund. We have the appropriations on one side, and the other side being the authorization. So unlike the tax credit, which is a permanent part of the tax code, the HPF needs to be reauthorized every so often. So currently, the HPF was last authorization expired at this past September, so the program is currently not authorized. It's worth noting that it's not uncommon for federal programs to not be authorized. As long as they're still, as long as Congress still appropriates funding for them, they can still receive funding. Of course, this doesn't mean this is by any means the ideal situation we want to be in. We think that it causes more uncertainty for everyone that relies on this funding. And also, we fear it could be at risk for any kind of cost-saving efforts or anything like that that we might see. So it's one of our top priorities to make sure we get this reauthorized. Again, we're working with bipartisan champions in Congress to help reauthorize that program and also increase that authorized level from 150 million to 250 million. This is also something that we expect legislation on soon. Again, hopefully in the next few weeks. So that's something I'm happy to kind of keep everyone posted on, and definitely one of the areas where we encourage everyone to take action. I also have a link there for an easy to sign on letter encouraging members to support efforts to reauthorize the HPF. Next slide. So yes, this next one of our annual ask is joining the Historic Preservation Caucus. This is really one of our easier asks that you're able to make. The caucus is really kind of a bipartisan group of individuals that recommend or that recognize the value of America's historic places. So every Congress, this needs to be reestablished. We always lose several members to retirement and elections. So we'll be looking to kind of build up those ranks again now that we're in a new Congress, but it's definitely one of the easier ways for people to be able to take action. Encourage a member to join the Preservation Caucus. It's currently co-chaired by Representative Mike Turner of Ohio and Representative Leger Fernandez of New Mexico. Next slide. So next, I know I want to talk a little bit about kind of what we're hearing in Washington. I know there's been a flurry of activity over the last month in regards to executive orders, secretarial orders, and other ways that it might be impacting preservation. Obviously, we could spend the whole hour just talking about these issues. But I definitely want to highlight a few things that we're following. We're definitely concerned about. One, of course, is the federal funding freeze that we saw at the end of January. I'm sure this impacted several of you. What we've seen is basically the federal funding fees was ordered as part of an Office of Management budget memo to basically ensure that any federal grants and funding was aligning with administration priorities. Several grant programs were specifically referenced as in need of review, including the Historic Tax Credit and Historic Preservation Fund. I am pleased to report that since then, at least funding has been restored, even though it was temporarily paused for state and tribal historic preservation officers. But funding for some of the HPF grants are still under review. I'm understanding that most of those are going out, but any future grants that haven't been announced yet to start accepting applications are on hold. Also, some funding tied specifically to the Inflation Reduction Act are on hold. But like I said, there's currently a court order blocking that pause, but I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about, how this is impacting everything right now, and also future attempts that perhaps are coming down the line. Next, I'll touch a little bit on the declaring a national energy emergency executive order. This is something that we saw also last month that's aiming to boost energy production through several actions, including increasing exploration on federal lands, accessing regulations, and revising the permitting process. Obviously, something that is very concerning to us, especially in the context of how this order might be implemented at the agency level. So we've already seen some of that from the Department of Interior. We also just heard something just yesterday from the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. So we're paying close attention to specifically how it's going to be impacting any attempts to undermine or avoid the National Historic Preservation Act, avoid Section 106 review, as well as the National Environmental Policy Act. So those are some of the things that we'll be paying attention to and how those are impacted. I'll say that we're kind of seeing this and then analyzing this the same as everyone else. Obviously, it's a very quick quick pace. And I think we're going to see more down the line, especially when it gets more to this agency level review. But I definitely wanted to kind of bring that up. And, I think it's important. A couple things. One is to, stay focused on some of our our priorities, as well as continue to drive that message home of the impact that historic preservation has and really the need. I think a lot of these orders underscore the need for us to be able to continue that message. Also, quickly mention the Celebrate America 250. This is potentially a chance for us to be a little bit more on the offensive, because it does recognize, recognizing the history of America or something like that in it. So they are looking for policy recommendations to put forward, and I think we have some great ideas regarding, the reauthorizing the historic preservation fund and getting these changes in the historic tax credit, that if we want to recognize and preserve history, this is a great way to do it through some of those examples. So next slide. I'll go ahead and kind of move a little bit into the kind of advocacy 101 here. So just some of the things to kind of keep in mind when you're advocating is, do your research, find out who your members of Congress are. Perhaps you have a new member of Congress. We had over 70 new members of Congress join. I know there's 2 special elections coming up in Florida, so there'll be some new folks coming in that way as well. It's a great way to start building that connection early. Also, I think it's important to find out what committees they serve on. So some of the key committees for preservation priorities are going to be the Appropriations Committee, the Ways and Means and Senate Finance Committee, as well as the House and Senate Natural Resources Committee. That may help you kind of hone in your message. So if you're talking for someone on the Natural Resources Committee, perhaps you spend a little bit more time on the HPF authorization, or on the tax credit, you might spend a little bit more time if you're on Ways and Means members. So that's one of the ways to kind of think about the issues that they're going to be dealing with, what your members are specifically dealing with. So we encourage you to check out their passport. If they've been in Congress for a while, maybe they've already signed on to be a co-sponsor of the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act in a previous Congress, or maybe they're already a member of the caucus. We're happy to help you as you're kind of doing some of that research, and really be a resource for you to kind of find out any kind of background and really help you be able to engage your members. But we encourage you to, call their office, introduce yourself, get the contact information for the staffer who handles historic preservation issues or public lands issues or tax issues, and really think of this as the start of an ongoing relationship. I think it's also important to remember that staff can change frequently. That's one of the things we all always deal with. We're always educating. You always have to be educating these on issues. Sometimes you might want to start a little further down the line, but this is their first exposure to preservation, so you really have to kind of start at a base level. Next slide. And I think it's important to keep in mind the role of grassroots, or the role of individuals to be able to have an impact. As myself, as a lobbyist, we can talk to members of Congress all day, but they really want to hear from you. They want to hear from constituents. They want to hear from members of the public that are being impacted by federal policy. So I think it's important to keep in mind, for one, that members of Congress are generalists. They're going to know a little bit about a lot of different topics, but you all are experts on historic preservation, and being able to provide that value really makes lawmakers more informed, and when they're more informed, they can make better decisions. So just at a base level, I think it's really important for the people who are doing this and working in this to under really being able to directly communicate with your members. Because if you don't share if you don't share your views on historic preservation, who else is going to? So I think it's really important to keep that in mind and really empower yourselves to be able to do that. Another thing I keep in mind is, using local examples. I think kind of connecting the dots for members of Congress, let them know how this project in your district, maybe it received a historic tax credit, or maybe it received a historic preservation fund grant. Connect the dots between how those federal dollars are now helping revitalize and creating jobs in their district, and be able to kind of understand that if it wasn't for these federal dollars, these projects may not happen. Um, and of course, we want you to come to DC as part of Advocacy Week, but you can really advocate from anywhere. And there's kind of several examples of some of the things that we work on to help try to bring bring the voice of grassroots voice to Congress a little bit easier. Next slide. So we host virtual advocacy weeks. We did this especially during COVID, but this is something that congressional offices are very used to. They're used to having setting up Zoom calls with their constituents back in Congress. It's a great way to be able to talk to their staff directly, be able to get that message across. And by doing it virtually, you're able to kind of bring in more voices into this. So if you have a historic property, you're able to kind of bring in multiple people who are involved in that, who may not always be able to come to DC or be able to carry that message. This is a great way to do that. Next, I definitely want to highlight the impact of historic site visits. I think this is one of the most powerful tools we have to influence lawmakers. Because we have amazing examples that not every industry has, where they can go to a historic tax credit project or a historic site and really be able to see firsthand that the impact of some of these programs have. So like I said, as they're there, connect the dots between what they're seeing and what's happening there versus the federal programs that are helping make that possible. And I think this is also a way to help make that personal connection with members of Congress. I think this is one of the most impactful ways. I know, just to share a brief example, I know we recently had some communication with our advocates in Oklahoma, and they had a congresswoman from there visit a historic tax credit site at the Oklahoma Zoo, and she was like, "Oh, I remember seeing this building as I was like just when I was a kid, and it's really great to see what's happening with it now." And that's the kind of thing that we're able to create with historic site visits, where they can kind of have that impact. I think it's also important to remember members of Congress are back in district often, and they're looking to find things to kind of fill their schedules. So the August recess is a great example. They're back in district the whole month of August, as well as other in district work periods throughout the year. And I think being able to show off these preservation projects is a great use, and something that offices are looking to do. Next slide. I would say, of course, we don't think there's any true replacement for going around the halls of Congress yourself and being able to advocate for preservation directly. I think it's a really rewarding experience to be able to do that. And we invite anyone to come to DC and join us for Preservation Advocacy Week. Like I said, we always have a great team from Florida, and we really try to provide all the materials and training that you need. So here's a few photos of the Florida team on the Hill doing that with Congressman Rutherford, and just in front of the Capitol there. Next slide. And just a few more kind of photos of Advocacy Week. I know we always host a congressional reception on the Hill. We have members of Congress come who have been key champions for preservation, so we get to hear from them. We also do an after-hours tour of the Capitol, which is always a highlight. So just to encourage everyone, it's really a enjoyable time, rewarding experience to be able to have that kind of direct influence and impact. So that's pretty much it for me. There's my contact information. Like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. I encourage you to engage with us, follow us on social media, sign up for our legislative update. We really try to provide the resources you need to be successful advocates.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank
Rob.
you.
That was great. I appreciate that. And we will share in our recap email all of those wonderful take action links, so you don't have to feverishly kind of worry about that and kind of be writing down the URLs. We got you. And then we did get some questions in the chat that we'll take care of during the Q&A section. So without further ado, Jack, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go.
All right. just to reiterate what Rob said, Preservation Action's work is incredibly important. And Advocacy Week is very, very impactful and always a fantastic reason to get together. But there are so many resources and opportunities, both on Preservation Action's website and the Florida Trust website, tools that will help your organizations or, just you as a preservationist at heart, better target your advocacy efforts and storytelling, all of which are very, very important. So my role in this is to really echo how important these tools are for preserving historic buildings across all size cities in the United States. We have two case studies. We have a first one that may resound more with our Main Streets folks. This is in Columbia, South Carolina. For a beautiful Victorian mansion that was converted into a funeral home in 1924, and it was vacant for a good 20 years before we came in. It's across from the University of South Carolina's law school. And we think Columbia is a great city to talk to because it's medium sized, makes sense. It's a college town, but still without the tools that Rob and his team and all of you are advocating for, it would be much harder to do something like this. So Melissa, would you mind going just quickly next slide? So after an extensive renovation, we did convert it to about 16 housing units and a lovely coffee shop on the ground floor. It will keep those law students well caffeinated as they hopefully study, become lawmakers, and preserve historic buildings through their policy. Um, so we did include just very, very high level funding sources. The project was about 3.2 million. And if you look at the right grid where it says sources, you'll see HTCs and then sponsor equity. HTCs were historic tax credits that Rob mentioned. As you see, it made up close to a third of the project's budget, which is incredibly important for especially a smaller project where it's hard to get sort of the revenue out of it afterwards, that would justify the construction cost. As much as we're appreciative of the bank for giving us a construction loan, they often like to see other funding sources to make the project seem more real and able to get across the finish line. HPE in that second line, in the 1.1 million, is the historic preservation easement. That's, as I mentioned, the tool we focus on. You essentially protect the four walls and the roof of a building in perpetuity. So this is one of the few tools that really make sure the building is standing for longer than all of us will be, which is great. Little gut check on mortality, but we'll talk about that at another time. And we are hugely, hugely supportive of not only the tools that Rob mentioned, but also the preservation easement. We are constantly working with lawmakers to just kind of get the IRS to give us a little more guidance on what they would like to see used. And one of the reasons we're on this call is when you do protect the building with the preservation easement, you donate the protection to a nonprofit organization like the Florida Trust. Sometimes that can go to state historic preservation offices as well. But we're forever grateful for our partners in the advocacy and the preservation world for making it possible for us to bring these buildings back to life. This was a relatively simple one, but some of these can get very, very nitty gritty in terms of the tools that you use. And we do specialize in all historic preservation tools at a local, state, and federal level. And then Melissa, I guess we can go to the second one. This one's a little bigger. This is in Nashville, Tennessee. It was a former YWCA, beautifully located right by the Capitol building, around a lot of historic office buildings that have been converted to hotels. This one is not dissimilar to that. We acquired it in 2019 and then we're able to convert it to 55 short-term rental units operated by a master tenant. Also, you'll go to the second after slide. This one had a little more hair on the deal, but it did at the high level use historic tax credits. As you see, that was 2.3 million, and then the historic preservation easement was able to generate 13.4 million in money for that project. Essentially, in a city like Nashville, you would look at uh, this beautiful building and then point down the street and say, well, there's like a 40-story tower that just got built over there. We would like to protect this building, and then you essentially take the development rights that you're giving away, the value of those rights, and you give those to a Melissa and Florida Trust like organization. In this case, it was the Historic Nashville Inc. That is treated as though you donate a car to charity, and you get to write it off on your income taxes. The preservation easement is a tax deduction program as opposed to a tax credit. And it can be paired with any and all other preservation tools. So one of our biggest, things we'd like to advocate for is right now we do focus on a lot of the larger markets just to have capital to then go ahead and prove to the IRS that this does pencil. And then if we were to get guidance, we truly envision this being a tool that you can use in cities of all sizes. Because those, you don't have to always give away the development rights to get value. The bricks on those beautiful buildings in small town main streets are worth something. And if we get guidance and can, really guarantee that you won't be bothered by Uncle Sam, it would make a lot more sense to be able to do some of these smaller buildings, and you can still generate a good 6 figures of capital for a project in a smaller town, which can pay for everything like architecture or cleaning up a site, a lot of pre-development work. So it's a really powerful tool, and one that we're really passionate about because it does require that building to stay as is for a long, long time. It's not forever. Um, so that's just a very quick overview of how the tools that Rob and his team advocate for really help us out there with boots on the ground put these projects together. We've had a lot of success in Florida and around the country, and we're just really, really passionate about being able to use these tools to spare our communities from further destruction. And I really do just want to say this is why Rob and his team and Melissa and her team do what they do. I cannot echo that enough. That it goes for the shippos and tippos as well. And without this community, historic preservation would be on a shaky footing. So I just want to say thank you to Rob and his team and Melissa for having us, and you all for being here.
I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing these case studies. I think the real world examples with some numbers in there are really, really helpful to kind of help to give real world examples to the things we're advocating for. So I appreciate that. Of course,
we've got sorry, I would say we have tools, we have economic impact studies that we have on our website. We work with Rutgers University to do those. And I will, once again echo Melissa, having those tangible things that your lawmakers can touch and see and reflect on is really, really important. And then to bring along the case study, historic tax credits are one of the few programs that actually generate more revenue than they give out. And we have a lot of tools on our impact studies that show lawmakers, hey, your investment is recouping for the federal government and the state government, because state historic tax credits also are very powerful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing our Nashville example here. Nashville is very close to my heart, as well as with H&I for years and years. So wonderful example. And I will say also that Tennessee does not have a state historic tax credit, which is something that we're also working on here in Florida, which Mark is going to share with us a little bit more about now. So Zubaly, are you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Yes, ma'am.
Right. You are up then. Good job.
Okay. As far as you want to describe who we are, why don't you do that?
I will describe who we are. So we've talked about federal advocacy. We've talked about some of these federal incentives and programs that we utilize to make preservation happen, that we are a part of protecting as well at the Florida Trust. And now we're going to talk about what we're going to do here in Florida during our legislative session, which is starting in just a few weeks. So to start, I just wanted to say, hopefully we all know this, but the Florida Trust is Florida's statewide nonprofit that works to protect our history and heritage. So that is just an overview of who we are. And at the end of our presentation, there'll be a page with resources if you'd like to learn more. There's always floridatrust.org. But here is us kind of our opportunity to share with you what we're going to be focusing on for the 2025 advocacy session here in Florida. So Mark, do you want to pick it up from there?
Yes, I think this slide tells it all, and it kind of backs up, especially what Rob was touching on, is the continuing education of policymakers on the importance of advocacy or the importance of historic preservation, and making sure that they're in tune with what's being done by us as preservationists and what they can do for us. And as Rob was saying, it's kind of an all year round thing. I mean, the legislative session in Florida is only 60 days, is a 2 month period with some committee weeks and all that. But it's something that we really encourage, like anything that you want to that you're engaged in, is to or anything that you advocate is to constantly be engaged with these policymakers throughout the year, not just when they're in session. Being involved when the time comes, in the off cycle or in the off when they're out of session, to bring them to some of these sites and to go visit and educate them when it's not when they're making policy decisions, especially here in Florida. I know on the national level, it's an ongoing 2 year thing that the resolutions and bills are in existence. In Florida, it's only 60 days, but really you need to be in communication with your people, your lawmakers, your county commissioners, your city folks, even on a continuous basis, when it's July and August and they're not being bothered so much to go visit them. Okay, you got the next slide up. Or just to give you the timeline here, maybe back up a slide if you can. The session starts on March 4th and runs through the 2nd of May. Bill filing deadline. That means the members, whatever legislation they're going to propose, and House members in the Florida are limited to 6 bills. The senators have unlimited, but that deadline of whatever bills are going to be possibly considered is on February 28th. So it's a week from tomorrow that all bills will be in. Saying that, we are going to be meeting with members and attending committee meetings before then, and possibly, hopefully, right before session as we hear some of the legislation that's coming through. One of the things that Melissa will be doing, or that the trust likes to do, is a continuous bill tracking. So everything that it possibly affects any kind of preservation in Florida, or historic preservation, she sends out these weekly advocacy updates. And I really encourage you if you're not signed up or haven't been getting them in years past, over the past few years, to be on board for that, because it will keep you up to date. And as things happen, it's not just a weekly thing. It could be a couple times a week when we need to, mobilize preservationists to, put pressure on a committee chairman, or to get a bill, a favorable hearing in a committee, to work those members that are your people back home, or your state lawmakers and stakeholders. Next slide, I guess. Yes. And our big day is our day on the Hill, as we call it, when in Tallahassee, like you guys have on the national level. We invite everyone and anyone, the more the merrier, to attend and work the halls of Tallahassee. We're doing it April 1st this year. And that will be right in the middle of session, which is good. We'll know what things are moving along that may be adverse, that we need to go and lobby against, and to also encourage some stuff that may need a little bump. And despite, you're being a constituent or whatnot, there's nothing like when a constituent comes to see these folks in the Capitol and advocate on an issue. It gets their attention and usually gets action. And also, we will be having, and that's the night of the 1st. I see you got the invite up. We will be having a legislative reception. This has been a good deal over the past few years that we've been holding it. We usually get at least a half dozen to a dozen state lawmakers and staff that come and visit the Florida Trust House. It's held at the Trust House, and we encourage them to, it gives us a chance in a more informal environment to kind of advocate and educate and just have a discussion of things. Um, Next slide, I think. Share your stories. Like like the case studies that Jack had earlier, and like what Rob was discussing on the state level, we bringing it home to these members are very centered on their district and on how this affects them and helps them. So making, writing these tangible stories, the tangible community-based examples, is important to submit to us and to get to the folks and to send to your policymakers that represent you, because it really brings it home on what historic preservation is being done in their districts and how it affects them. And I think the next slide, we can get into it even more if it is. I'm gonna the like I said, number one, number two, to seek the full funding of the historic grants, the preservation grants. This year, the governor's budget didn't have, am I correct? It didn't have anything in his proposed budget, which doesn't matter. Like what Rob said, the legislature in Florida are the ones that make the budget and the policy. The governor does have a line item veto, though, here in Florida, but still, the advocating for these matching grants or for these grants is important, and the stories that they tell. It is probably going to be one of our major issues that we're going to be advocating for this year, because of things, on the national level, making sure that we get our resources from the state level. Um, I think maybe anything I need to add on that, Melissa.
No, I think that was great.
Okay. And then the third thing here is the historic tax credits. And just a little, it's kind of it's hard to explain where we're at on this. In the past 3 years, we have actually had bills filed. Last year, we had the Department of State, somewhat helping us and guiding us as they were with us. They are still with us on the tax credits, but they don't necessarily like the portability of the tax credits. And to us, that kind of, defeats the purpose of it. We have a few advocate lawmakers. One is being Representative Salzman, who was our sponsor the first year in the House, and she has made this one of her requests to the Speaker of the House presently and the next Speaker, that she would like to have these tax credits put in place before she is term limited out in 3 years. Currently, and this is all kind of inside baseball and not really out in the open, but there is a affordable housing bill that is like a glitch bill for this live local thing that they passed last year. That's supposed to spur more affordable housing in the state of Florida. Currently, she has that language in that bill, at the tax credit language for historic preservation in the bill that will come out sometime here, hopefully in the next week. It may not be in the Senate, but we've never really had issues in the Senate in the past. In fact, all 3 years, I think we passed it through the Senate without any issue. This year, she's kind of working it to put it into a package that will be the overall tax credit, sorry about that, tax credit affordable housing package. And hopefully when that comes out, that, it'll be part of the House plan and that the Senate will probably match us on it. Next slide.
Thanks, Mark. That was a
Okay.
great overview of where we're at on our first three advocacy focus items for this year. And then on the fourth, we're really focusing this year on being strong national partners for national advocacy initiatives. We've always, as Rob said, been a part of Preservation Action's Advocacy Day in DC. We've always worked as hard as we could, but this year we're going to try to work even a little harder because there is so much at stake currently. Rob did a great job outlining what those were, but there's so much at stake right now for preservation from the federal level that we want to make sure that we are lending our voice and being strong supporters of how important that is in DC and how that trickles down to Tallahassee, all throughout the state of Florida. So we will continue that work, and the best way to stay in touch with us is, as Mark mentioned, being part of our advocacy email distribution. So if you're not already registered to receive our advocacy emails, we'll make sure that in our follow-up that there is a link on how you can get involved if you'd like to be on those. So if we have calls to action, especially timely calls to action, we'll be sending those through our advocacy emails. So just be sure that you are engaged with us on that, and we will do the best we can to kind of trickle that information down from the national level to the local level, especially on how you can take action. And then our fifth area that we are focusing on this session, as Mark mentioned, is we will continue to monitor and track bills that would impact preservation. So we haven't hit that filing deadline yet, so we don't know exactly what we're going to be working on. It's still a little bit of a fluid situation, but we know for sure we have several that we have earmarked already that we have questions about, we want to talk to the sponsors about, or that we know that we will be supporting. So once we start session and we start with our advocacy emails, you will see us tracking those every week as well. Mark, is there anything that you would add on point 4 and 5 there?
No, I think you guys, the trust does a great job of keeping track and monitoring all these. So, sign up and make sure that you're in for the weekly updates that occur, or sometimes multiple updates in a week. We don't try and overburden you with too many, fire drills, only, to keep you informed. But there are moments where there is a call for advocacy or call for action that we ask you to reach out to members and do, to get their attention.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to speed through this because I want to make sure we have time for lots of questions. But as I mentioned, to get involved, signing up for those advocacy emails and those calls to actions are really great. To Jack's point and Rob's point and Mark's point, helping to build relationships with your lawmakers and demonstrate the value of historic preservation in your community is a year-round thing that is always welcome and helpful. And then, of course, you can join the Florida Trust and help us to fund all these important, great works. Another resource I wanted to mention just quickly is Florida's Preservation Toolkit. So that is online as a free resource. It is a way to get engaged in historic preservation, no matter where you are in your personal historic preservation journey. And there is an entire section in the Historic Preservation Toolkit around advocacy. So a lot of these great advocacy 101 sort of things, how to advocate, what the rules are, all of that will be included in that section of the toolkit. Of course, if you're interested in other wonderful preservation things as well, you can find that there. So, and then finally, here is our slide on how you can get in touch with me and the Florida Trust. And if you want to get in touch with Mark, you can send it to me and I'll send it to Mark. But I think we can all cover that in our recap email as well. So let's get to the burning questions we have going on here. The first one, I'm going to start at the bottom because we had several questions about the glitch bill that Mark mentioned. And I will say, I don't think that has been filed yet. So I don't think there is a bill number. Mark, am I correct?
Correct. It's being worked on. As soon as we get that, we'll make it public, and once we confirm that that language is in there, I'm not sure exactly what other glitches are involved because that was dealing with the issues beyond preservation. But I know our little piece is that tax credit piece is hopefully going to be part of the House package.
Yep. So that is one we're certainly tracking. And as we get closer to that filing deadline, we'll know the bill number and we will send it out and let everyone know what's going on there. Another question we had, I think this one may be for you, Rob. Will a Dear Colleague letter for the HPF appropriations be prepared this year in advance of Lobby Day?
Yes, I think I saw that from Elizabeth. So yes, just a little bit about background. Every year we work with the Historic Preservation Caucus to send what they call a Dear Colleague letter to other members of Congress, and it is in support of our advocacy ask for the Historic Preservation Fund, so 225 million. We're still working on that now. So I can't say for sure if it'll be ahead of Advocacy Week. My guess is it may not be just because of timing of where they are and kind of the FY26 ask is I don't think we're expecting the president's budget until later. So it's just, some of this is just kind of getting pushed back. I think in an ideal world, we would have it ahead of Advocacy Week. That way everyone can share that as part of it. But it definitely in the works, and we'll have more by the time of Advocacy Week to share.
Awesome. And then kind of a follow-up letter to that for you, Rob, is around the secretarial letters. Is there a way those can be summarized so that folks can engage people more effectively on that?
Yeah, I shared kind of the news release from the Department of Interior about those secretarial orders. I think we're still kind of reviewing them as well. I think the big thing is just kind of like starting to see these agencies implement this executive order and kind of paying attention to how that's happening and what it is they're going to be targeting. Like I said, we haven't seen a specific reference to the Historic Preservation Act as part of the DOI ones, but I know there was one with the ACHP basically saying that emergency um, emergency provisions of Section 106 would apply to could apply to energy projects that aren't already a part of under a different guidance on that. So that's the kind of thing that we're kind of tracking and paying attention to. But yeah, the I sent the link in the chat to the onto the DI one to keep in mind.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. A question for Zubaly and I is around our Advocacy Day, April 1st. So the question is, how many people per organization do you suggest we send? And what are some criteria for recruiting the best people to send to the event? So, for instance, should you rotate them every year? We don't have a maximum number of people that your organization could send, because the more people we have coming, we could break it up into groups. We have a lot of lawmakers, so we have
More
more
ground we
than
can
enough
cover.
people.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we could kind of break it up into groups. I think, Daniel, similar to how we did last year, I think we accidentally called it the A team and the B team. We'll find different names this year. But you can break up into groups and cover more ground that way. And I think that in terms of, if you have people who would like to come again, it's always nice to have some people who have done it before. So it is just like tactically confusing to walk around the Capitol in Tallahassee sometimes, even though they do have a new wayfinding, Mark. I don't know if you've seen it, the new wayfinding digital screen that shows you where you are. It's very fancy.
Oh, I haven't
And
been
then
in
you could do
there.
like a QR code. It's like you're lost on the interstate, and you put in your QR code and it'll like walk you through. So
Well,
I
we,
guess that
we definitely don't have that at the national levels, that's for sure. So
no. So we can get feedback on how well that works. But anyway, so if we want to get Daniel, folks that have had experience doing it before to help kind of serve as leaders within these groups, that for those who haven't come, I think that's great. We always do encourage students to participate as well. Last year, I think we had 3 or 4 students that were part of the team. I think it's a wonderful, great experience for them to get this real world advocacy and also like the political science piece of it. How does this work in action? I think that's really great. So hopefully that answered your question, Daniel, there. And Shelby, it is April 1st is our advocacy day here in Tallahassee, and we'll include that in our wrap up. It was my grandmother's birthday and also April Fool's Day. So I'm sure it'll be full of hijinks. And I think we have time for one last question, unless we can get through this one quick and anybody wants to type in. Well, we'll have time for 2 because I can answer yours pretty quickly, Laura Lee. Around the portability concern for the state historic tax credit, basically that would be like a secondary market that would exist. Jack, do you want to give like a high level expansion on what that secondary market would look like or how it has worked with other states?
Yeah, so a lot of the times you'll have states pair sort of their requirements with the federal requirements. And it is essentially just like another layer that you can add, and states do it differently. Some have project caps, so they have an unlimited pool, but you can max out at a certain dollar amount. And then some, like Ohio, are incredibly competitive, where you essentially are up against a bunch of it's a beauty pageant, a bunch of other projects. And they have a set pool, but then you can get a larger actual dollar amount, though it is more competitive. The latter is what we see across the country more frequently. I think Kentucky is the one where they have the project cap, and where we scratch our heads a little bit there. But um, the way tax credits work is you essentially, anything that if you turn the building upside down and shook it, um, anything that stays in that building when you shake it are going to qualify for what are called rehabilitation expenditures, and you get certain cents on the dollar back through those credits that are often bought by large investors, but will sometimes come in and be bought by banks. I know up here in Cleveland, Sherwin-Williams and some of our insurance firms are very big buyers of these credits just to help them offset some income. I would guess Florida, if they were to implement something, would be similar to what we see around the country, where it's a competitive process. But once you go through the preparation for the state projects, you generally just send it right up to the federal as well. And federal is not a competitive process. It is just given based on the project needs and sort of what you apply for.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we're a couple of minutes over, but I wanted to end on this question. It's for you, Rob, I think. Do you have any suggestion on ways we can all collectively help to stay ahead of future challenges for things like the CHP and NRHP?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. I think I always kind of go back to um talking to your members of Congress. I think a lot of times where we kind of it's easy to kind of we have all this information coming out to us all at once, and I think it's easy to almost become a little distracted by everything that's like coming in. But I think carrying the message of the impact of historic preservation to your member of Congress, encourage them to like I mean, part of that can be how about how you're concerned about how these agency actions might impact the National Historic Preservation Act or something like that. I think that can be part of your message, but I think it's a lot of it is staying engaged with your members of Congress. I know on our end, we're also following kind of nominations and appointments at the federal level. So we saw one with Secretary Burgum. We also expect a National Park Service director to be nominated at some point, as well as the ACHP director is also a presidential appointee as well. So those are things that we're following. We're also working kind of behind the scenes with like the White House Appointment Office and and trying to bring forward names that we think that would be good. So those are some of the things that we're working on. But like I said, I think it broadly just carrying that message of historic preservation.
Yeah, I think that's great. And also be on our advocacy email list because we will be funneling down all those call to actions. Well, Caitlin, that may not work because I know you don't live in Florida, but I'd be happy to send you information as well. So make sure you do that. But we're 4 minutes late, so I apologize for that. But thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. And thank you especially again to the GBX group, who are today's Lunch and Learn sponsor. And of course, if you are interested in sponsoring a future Lunch and Learn, we can email Laura Glenn. You can email me and I will forward it to Laura Glenn very happily. But we really appreciate you being engaged in our advocacy efforts year round. And if you would like to be a part of the March Lunch and Learn, it will be on the Florida Preservation Awards. So we're very excited about that community outreach piece. So thank you all. Look in your emails for our follow-up that will have all these wonderful presentations and links. And we will see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon, Rob and Jack.
Yep.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. Bye, y'all.